The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, A Journey to Tibet. During his sojourn to India, he found many opportunities to mingle and converse with the Buddhists, and so thoroughly was his curiosity excited by their accounts of Tibet that he resolved to immediately undertake a journey to that almost unknown country. With this view, he chose a route extending through Kashmir, a country he had often desired to explore. On October 14, 1887, he took a place in the compartment of a railway train, literally filled with soldiers, and travelled from Lahore to Rawalpindi, reaching the latter place at noon the following day, and so forth. And he had a Negro servant, Pondicherry, and so forth. And he procured a tonga, a two-wheeled vehicle drawn by a pair of horses, and so forth. And then he finally gets here, because we've got to skip to like page 29. Okay, because this, if I remember, it's all him talking about his travels, and so forth. Actually it's page 20, because we found this pretty interesting. He and someone else emerged from the forest about noon, descended into a small hamlet on the riverbank, and having refreshed themselves with a cold lunch, resumed the journey. As they passed the marketplace, he stopped with the intention of purchasing a glass of warm milk from a Hindu who was squatting beside a large pail of boiling milk. But what was his surprise when he proposed that the author should take the pail with its contents, declaring that he had defiled the liquid. He only wanted a glass of milk, not the pail, the author explained. According to our laws, replied the Hindu, if anyone not belonging to our caste gazes fixedly at any object or article of food, we must throw away the one and wash the other. You have defiled my milk, O Sahib, and no one will drink it, for not only did you gaze at it, but you also pointed your finger in its direction. Having long examined his merchandise to make sure it was real milk, as well as pointed out from which side of the pail the author desired to have it poured, he stood convicted. And as he always respects the laws and customs of strange nations, he readily gave him a rupee, the full price of the spilt milk, although he had taken but one glass. The incident taught him a lesson, however, and he was never again guilty of fixing his eyes on the food of a Hindu. There is no religious doctrine more encumbered with ceremonies, laws and commentaries than Brahmanism. While each religion possesses but one Bible, one Gospel or one Quran, from which the Hebrews, the Christians and the Mohammedans borrow their faith, the Brahmin Hindus possess so great a number of commentaries in folio that the most learned Brahmin that ever existed scarcely had time to reach the 10th. This is what the author is saying. It's not what we're saying. People seem to say that. They come and listen in comments and say, oh, you said, and it's not true. No, that's what the writer, the author has written. We're just repeating it. Okay, we're just reading it. Okay. Leaving aside the 4 books of the Vedas, the Puranas, written in Sanskrit and composed of 18 volumes containing 400,000 stanzas, which treat of law, theology, medicine, of the creation, the destruction and regeneration of the world, etc. The vast Shastras, which treat of mathematics, grammar, etc. The Upavedas, Upanishads, Puranas, which serve as explanation to the Puranas, and a host of other commentaries in many volumes. There still remain the 12 large books containing the laws of Manu, grandson of Brahma. These books not only relate to penal and civil laws, but also to canonical regulations, which impose on their adepts such an infinite number of ceremonies that we cannot but admire the unalterable patience of the Hindus in the observation of the precepts dictated by Saint Manu. Manu was incontestably a great legislator and profound thinker, but he has written so extensively that he frequently contradicts himself in the same page. The Brahmins do not even remark this, and the poor Hindus, whose mission is to labour for the support of that caste, humbly obey their clergy, whose commands enjoin them to never touch a man not belonging to their own caste, while a stranger is absolutely forbidden to fix his attention on anything owned by the Hindus. By this adherence to the strict sense of the law, the Hindu imagines that his food is contaminated when it becomes the point of attraction to a stranger. And yet, even as late as the period of its second birth, take note of this, Brahmanism was a purely monotheistic religion, recognizing but one infinite and indivisible God. But as in all ages and religions, the clergy, taking advantage of their privileged position, gradually enacted laws of their own and instituted different forms of external worship, hoping thereby to influence the ignorant masses. That's what we thought all along, but we just needed to find this kind of information. That they were all monotheistic originally. They believed in the one God, as every other, well, let's say, organized religion, Judaism, Islam, etc., believed in, right, or believe in. Originally, and somewhere along the way, their latter disciples started to add to it and then started introducing a pantheon of gods, a multitude of gods. And that's why today they've got, say, 30,000 different gods. So they wandered very, very far from the original text and the original teachings from the original founder. By degrees, the principles of monotheism, of which so clear a conception is given by the Vedas, degenerated into an absurd, unlimited series of gods. See, that's what we just said. Pantheon of gods, multitude of gods, probably about 30,000 of them, as they have today, or something like that. Goddesses, semi-gods, genii, angels and demons, all represented by idols as varied in form as they are repulsive to the sight. These people, formerly as proud as their religion was pure and grand, are now drifting into a complete state of idiocy, the day scarcely sufficing for the accomplishment of all the duties prescribed by the ecclesiastical laws, or their ecclesiastical laws. It may well be positively asserted that the Hindus subsist merely to provide for the principal sect of Brahmins, who have grasped the temporal power formerly held by the independent sovereigns of the people. While governing India, the English never interfere with this phase of public life, when they governed at that time, and the Brahmins took advantage of this to inspire in the nation the hope of a better future. The sun soon vanished behind the towering peaks, and the shadows of night immediately fell over the picturesque scenery they were traversing. The deep hush of sleep then also spread over the narrow valley lapped by the Jhelum, and so forth. And he probably goes on about his travels. So I'm going to skip all that till he actually gets to this monastery, and he actually has these supposed scrolls or books or whatever in his hand. Okay, still going on about happenings on the way to this monastery. And he finally comes across a lama. At the top of the steep flight, he was greeted by a corpulent lama with a fringe of scraggy beard beneath his chin, a characteristic of the Tibetan people, and exceedingly ugly features, but who received him with the utmost cordiality. His dress consisted of a yellow robe and a cloth cap of the same colour with ear laps. In his right hand he carried a brass prayer wheel, which he set in motion from time to time without the least pause in the conversation. This constituted a perpetual prayer, which, being communicated to the ear, was more easily wafted to heaven by the aid of the elements. After crossing a long succession of low rooms, in which was shelved a variety of images of Buddha, all sorts and sizes buried beneath a thick mantle of dust, they finally emerged upon an open terrace from which the eye rested on a most barren waste, interspersed with ledges of grey rocks and traversed by a single road, lost in both directions and beyond the limits of the horizon. They were scarcely seated when an attendant appeared with hot beer, or chiang, as it is called, or chiang, as it is called in this region, prepared within the walls of the monastery. This beverage gives the monks a quantity of superfluous flesh, which is considered by the people as a sign of particular favour from heaven. The Tibetan language is generally spoken here. The origin of this tongue is enveloped in obscurity. The accepted theory, however, is that a king of Tibet, who reigned in the days of Muhammad, undertook the creation of a universal language to be used by all the followers of Buddha. With this end in view, he simplified the Sanskrit grammar, composed an alphabet containing an infinite number of signs, and thus formed the basis of a tongue of exceedingly easy pronunciation, but of most complicated orthography, no less than 8 characters being required to represent a single sound. The modern literature of Tibet is all written in this language. The Tibetan tongue in its purity, moreover, is spoken in Ladakh and in Oriental Tibet only. A dialect formed from a mixture of the mother tongue and a variety of idioms borrowed from the people of adjacent regions, being used in all other parts of the country. There always existed 2 tongues, even in everyday life among Tibetans, one being utterly incomprehensible to the woman, while the other is spoken by the entire nation. The Tibetan tongue, in all its purity and integrity, can be found, or could be found, in the monasteries only. The monks much prefer European visitors to Mohammedans, and when asked the reason of this preference, the Lama replied, "The Mohammedans have nothing in common with our religion. In their recent victorious campaign, they converted by force a number of Buddhists to Islam, right? And it will require great efforts on their part to bring back these descendants of Buddhists into the path of the true God." Okay, so they went there and they forced them to convert to Islam by whatever means they used. Not only do they profess the essential principles of monotheism, but they also form part of the rank of worshippers of Buddha in almost the same degree as the Tibetan Lamas themselves. The only error of the Christians is that after adopting the great doctrine of Buddha, they, at the very outset, completely separated themselves from him and created another Dalai Lama, while theirs alone had received the divine favour of seeing the majesty of Buddha face to face and the power of serving as intermediary between heaven and earth. Okay, that's their claims, right? "Who is this Dalai Lama of the Christians of whom you speak?" he asked. "We have a Son of God to whom we address our fervent prayers. It is to him we have recourse that he may intercede for us near our one and indivisible God." "It is not to him I referred, Sahib," he replied. "We also respect him whom you recognize as the Son of an only God. Only we do not regard him as such, but as the excellent being, the chosen one from among all. Buddha did indeed incarnate himself with his intelligence in the sacred person of Isa, who without the aid of fire and sword went forth to propagate our great and true religion through the entire world. I speak of your terrestrial Dalai Lama, to whom you have given the title of Father of the Church. There lies the great sin. May it be remitted to the sheep that have strayed from the fold into the evil path," concluded the Lama fervently as he once more set his prayer wheel in motion. Well, that's obviously what they believed, right? In their monastery, their Buddhism, their religion, etc. I understood that he alluded to the Pope. This is what the author thought. He's talking about the Pope. "You have said that a son of Buddha, Isa, the chosen one, propagated your religion throughout the world. Who then is he?" the author inquired. The Lama opened his eyes in profound amazement at this question and muttered something. The author could not catch, then murmured almost unintelligibly. He murmured almost unintelligibly. "Isa is a great prophet, one of the first after the 22 Buddhas. He is greater than any of the Dalai Lamas, for he constitutes a part of the spirituality of the Lord. It is he who has instructed you, who has brought back frivolous souls to God, who has rendered you worthy of the blessings of the Creator, who has endowed each creature with the knowledge of good and evil. His name and his deeds have been recorded in our sacred writings, and whilst reading of his great existence spent in the midst of erring people, we weep over the horrible sin of the pagans, who assassinated him after putting him to the most cruel tortures. The author was forcibly struck by the Lama's words, the Prophet Isa, his tortures and death, our Christian Dalai Lama. The recognition of Christianity by the Buddhists all combined to make the author think more and more of the career of Jesus Christ, and he begged his interpreter to omit nothing, don't leave anything out, of the Lama's conversation. Where are these sacred writings, and by whom were they compiled? The author asked. The principal rolls, said the monk, written in India and Nepal at different epochs. It's probably different times, ages, right? According to the course of events, are at Lhasa and number many thousands. In some of the larger convents, there are copies made by the Lamas at different periods during their stay at Lhasa and later presented to the convents as souvenirs of their visits to the Great Master, our Dalai Lama. Do you not possess any of these copies relating to the Prophet Isa? No, we do not possess any. Our convent is of little importance, and the Lamas have collected but a few hundred manuscripts since its foundation. The large cloisters possess thousands of them, but they are sacred things, and you cannot see them anywhere. After a few minutes more conversation, the author returned to the camp, reflecting deeply on what had been said by the Lama. Isa, the prophet of Buddhists, how could that have been? Being of Jewish origin, he dwelt in Palestine and Egypt, and the scripture contains not a word, not the slightest allusion to the part played by Buddhism in the education of Jesus. The author determined to visit every convent in Tibet, hoping to gather more ample information concerning the Prophet Isa and perhaps find copies of documents relating to him. Without being aware of it, they traversed the Namikala Pass at an altitude of 13,000 feet, from which they descended into the valley of the Saranoma River. Turning southward, they reached Kabo, etc., etc. And they went through Kashmir. Looks like Kabo. And then he met some yellow robed monks, and he followed them. And they had prayer wheels. Many pious Buddhists utilised the current of rivers for this purpose, etc., etc. And he finally found himself seated on a bench in a dimly lighted room, whose walls were adorned with the inevitable statues of Buddha, books, and prayer wheels with the loquacious monks eagerly explaining the significations of each object. And these volumes treat of religion, no doubt, the author ventured during a pause. Yes, was the reply. They treat of the first and principal rights of everyday life. We also possess several volumes of the words of Buddha, consecrated to the great and indivisible divine being, and to all things that have come from his hands. Is there anything relating to the Prophet Isa among these books? The author asked. No, Sahib, returned the monk. We have nothing but a few of the principal treatises relative to the observance of religious rites. As to the biographies of our saints, they are preserved at Lhasa, and even some of the larger convents have not yet had time to procure copies of them. Before coming here, he lived many years in the large monastery at the other extremity of the Ladakh, where he saw thousands of volumes and rolls of parchment copied at diverse periods by the lamas of that place. In the course of further conversation, the author learned that the convent in question was situated near Leh. His persistent inquiries, however, unfortunately aroused suspicion in the minds of the lamas, and it was with evident relief on their part that he was finally guided back to the inn, where after a light supper he soon fell into a sound sleep, leaving instructions to his Hindu servant to cautiously ascertain from the young lamas the name of the convent in which the chief had lived before his appointment to Lama Yer. And at daybreak continues his journey, and he goes through some narrow passage. And he's going into his details of his travels. See, it's the Prophet Isa, they only repeated what he already knew, that the books which would give him any information concerning him were to be found at Lhasa, and that the larger monasteries only possessed a few copies of them. The author now abandoned all thought of going through the Karakoram and determined to find the history of the Prophet Isa, which would perhaps place the private life of the best of men under a new light and complete the vague accounts given of him in the New Testament. At a short distance from Lear and at the opening of the valley bearing the same name, the road stopped short, etc., etc. At twilight he reached Lear and descended into a bungalow specially constructed for Europeans who come over the Indian route in the hunting season. The Ladakh formerly made part of Great Tibet, but the frequent invasions of northern nations who traversed this country or that country in attempting to conquer Kashmir, and the many wars of which it was a scene of action, not only reduced it to misery but also resulted in its separation from the political domination of Lhasa by its passing through the hands of one conqueror to those of another. The Mohammedans, who took possession of Kashmir and the Ladakh at an early period, forcibly converted the weak inhabitants of Little Tibet to Islamism, or to Islam. The political existence of the Ladakh ended with the annexation of that country to Kashmir by the Sikhs. It's a different Hindu or Indian religion. They wear the turbans, beards, and supposedly they don't wash their hair, all this sort of stuff. That's what Hindus say, because they seem to be against each other, like, because one believes this, one believes that, okay, about each other. We do remember a news report here of a Hindu on a long local road speeding past them, and they got all furious and they chased after the guy apparently, and we got to do him over. They usually carry ceremonial knives with them. We did see a Sikh walking down the road with one, and we thought, whoa, if we did that we'd end up being under arrest. He actually pulled it out. He didn't pull the actual sword or whatever it was that it was scabbard, but he had this beside him, right, as he was walking along. Yeah, but a lot of them that we've actually spent time with in a computer course, they're actually quite funny. They're all wearing different kind of turbans, right? And just out of curiosity, I said, well, you guys, this guy's wearing blue, a lot of them are wearing blue, a lot of them are wearing red or yellow, whatever, right? So does that mean that you're on a higher stage or a higher level? Because this guy seemed to be the boss of all the other ones, shouting out to them and all this sort of stuff. Not telling them what to do, but just being funny or whatever. Looks like we thought he might have had a bit of authority there, he's on a different level. And he says, oh, why is that guy got a pink one? And he goes, oh, because he's gay. They're quite humorous like that, Then they say his name and say, oh yeah, because you're a gay, aren't you? To him, they're just joking around. Okay. But obviously, he just said, nah, they just wear any colour, whatever you feel like, There's no status level and all that sort of stuff. If you want to wear a blue one today, wear a blue one. If you want to wear a red one tomorrow, pink one or whatever, green one, it's up to you. It's up to you. It's your choice. But they're quite humorous with their own peoples, right? Okay, so the political existence of the Ladakh ended with the annexation of that country to Kashmir by the Sikhs, when the people were permitted to again practice their ancient religion. 2/3 of the inhabitants took advantage of this freedom to reconstruct their gompas and resume their former life. The Baltistans alone remained Shiite Musulmans. Skeet. Is that skeet? Is that supposed to be like Shiite or something? This here says skeet. So it's kind of weird. Musulmans, a sect to which the conquering of the country had belonged. Notwithstanding this, however, they have retained but a very vague tinge of Islamism, the character of which is revealed mostly in their customs and the polygamy they practice. So they have more than one wife. Probably have 3 or 4. The Lamas declare that they do not yet despair of bringing them back to the faith of their ancestors. In regard to religion, the Ladakh is dependent on Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, and the resident of the Dalai Lama. So this must be 1800s or something, because didn't the Chinese invade it and the Dalai Lama had to flee, something like that, sometime in the 20th century, right? The Chinese invaded it. Okay, so in regard to religion, the Ladakh is dependent on Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, and the residence of the Dalai Lama. It is at Lhasa also that the principal Kutus, or supreme lamas, and the Chogzots, or managers, are elected politically. It is under the authority of the Maharaja of Kashmir, who appoints the governor at in that particular time, 1800s, 1900s, whatever. Right? The population of the Ladakh is essentially Mongolian, but is divided into Ladakians and Chichampas. They lead a sedentary life, built villages along the narrow valleys, etc., etc. And he gives us a description of what they look like. Okay, and he keeps going into that, and he talks about the woman and all this sort of stuff. And agriculture, scarcity of wood, and the other peoples. What's this? What's this? Dwelling among them is the little colony of the Komba, a Bohemian set of people who came from the vicinity of Lhasa and lead a miserable existence as mendicants. Incapable of work and speaking a tongue not understood in the country in which they beg their bread, they are objects of universal scorn, being tolerated only through compassion for their deplorable condition when starvation drives them in numbers into the villages. Polyandry, which is practiced in all families, deeply aroused the author's curiosity. It was by no means a consequence attending the doctrines of Buddhism, for this custom existed long before the appearance of Buddha. It has assumed enormous proportions, or it had assumed enormous proportions in India at that time, where it constituted one of the most active means of checking a population that ever tends to increase. And even at the present day, the practice of killing female children at birth makes terrible ravages in that country. All efforts on the part of the English having proved fruitless in their struggle against the suppression of future mothers. Mano himself made polyandry a law, and Buddhist preachers who had abjured Brahmanism and advocated the use of opium imported the custom into the island of Ceylon, Tibet, Mongolia and Korea. Though long suppressed in China, polyandry, whose stronghold is in Tibet and Ceylon at that time, also flourished amongst the Kalmucks, being between Todas in southern India and Nayars on the Malabar coast. Traces of this odd marriage constitution are also found among the Tasmanians and in North America among the Iroquois Indians. Right. Furthermore, polyandry had even flourished in Europe, if we are to believe Caesar, who says in his De Bello Gallico, Liv 5, page 17, and it's got that in the Latin there. All this proves conclusively that it is impossible to look upon polyandry as a religion, as a religious custom. In Tibet, it may be explained by motives of an economic order if we take into consideration the average quantity of tillable land falling to each one of its inhabitants. To maintain a population of 1,500,000 on a surface of 1,200,000 square kilometres, the Buddhists were forced to adopt polyandry, while each family is moreover obliged to furnish one member to a religious order. The firstborn son is pledged to a gompa, which is invariably found on one of the heights of near each village. When the child has attained the age of 8 years, he is introduced to a caravan on its way to Lhasa, where he enters one of the convents and remains until the age of 15 as a novice. There he learns to read and write and studies the religious rites and the sacred parchments written in the Pali tongue, the language formerly spoken in the Maguada country, where, according to tradition, Buddha Gautama was born. And the elder brother chooses a wife, etc., etc. And he goes on about women and their rights.